All right, we're continuing in the book of Ruth. I want to ask this question: how many have read ahead and gone ahead to the end? Yeah, you didn't have very many chapters to have to worry about there, unlike some of them that just go on and on and on. But it has so much within it that pertains to what was going to be taking place later on, centuries later. And as you study this, we find out God can use anyone, whether it's somebody as Ruth that's a Moabitess or whoever that it might be. He brings them in to his plan. And it's always kind of surprising how he works the circumstances around and how that he guides every bit of it. To kind of recap a little bit, of course, this is occurring during the time of the judges. At this time, they did not have a king. Mostly what it would happen whenever that Israel or one of the tribes would get in trouble, there would be what they call a judge that would be raised up. And sometime we might do a study on that, but I suppose the most notable one is Gideon. And they even some believe that this that was taking place with Ruth and with Boaz was during the time of Gideon. And some believe that possibly Boaz, that we talk about in here, may have served in kind of like we would call it a militia of Israelites that went out to do battle against the Midianites. So he was kind of a man of valor. Boaz was a man of high integrity and a man who loved God. So we're going to look at the third chapter of the book of Ruth. And we're going to find that at this point, Ruth is not that familiar with what some of the custom, what some of the law of Moses teaches. I think she was probably being acclimated to it and becoming familiar with it. But as we go on in this study, we're going to find that it's very deeply rooted in the culture and in the society of the Jews. And you'll find a lot of things referred to in here that goes back to the book of Leviticus, back to the book of Deuteronomy, some of the books of Moses. And it concerns itself with about two things. And we find that it concerns itself with a place, which was Israel, and with a people, that is the children of Israel. Now all of this kind of goes back to the promise that God made unto Abraham. I will make of thy seed a mighty nation. In fact, that's what Abraham's name means, a great multitude. And it was always very important in that day and in that time that they keep kind of like their own genealogy of where they came from, and to kind of keep their line, I don't want to say pure, but to keep their line, their genealogical line, to keep it of integrity. Because especially with this one, we're going to find that the Lord Jesus Christ has people like Ruth and Boaz, and the offspring of Ruth and Boaz, Jesse and David, as his ancestor, as his fleshly ancestor. And we want to kind of interject something here that since the fall of man, and since that it was realized a Messiah would come into the world, I believe that Satan had been doing everything at this point to try to disrupt that lineage and to try to stop Christ from coming into the world. So at this point, we're going to look at the third chapter, and there are two things you're going to notice in here. First of all, part of their tradition and part of what they kept as far as the law of Moses was concerned are two things. And one of them is the levirate, Levirate. And this was kind of a device, a social device, a scriptural device that they would perpetuate or keep the line of a family going. Sometimes we'll find, like in the book of Leviticus, or excuse me, the book of Deuteronomy, that if an individual, a man who was kind of head over his family, if he died and he had no offspring, then it was the duty of his brother, who was kind of next in line, to take his widow as his wife. And the children that would be raised up in the name of that deceased individual. Okay. It was so that they kept that family going and that lineage going. The second thing was what they called the Goel, G-O-E-L, and that was to redeem property that had been lost for some reason. Maybe they went into debt. Maybe that they had to sell all of their property in order to sustain themselves. And so it was a right, and it was kind of a law that if a landowner or somebody who had property lost that property, maybe went into debt, maybe had to mortgage it out, then his next of kin would buy that back for him. And there's a celebration or a feast day or a feast that they call the Year of Jubilee, and we won't go into that. But that has to do with everybody who's lost their property in the 50th year. That's returned unto them. But if in the meantime, between when they lost their property and the 50th year, somebody of the family could come along and buy that property and keep that property going. And the reason why that they did that is what we're seeing today over in Israel, so that a foreign power wouldn't get their footprint, so to speak, into that. That land had been promised unto them through Abraham. God had promised it. There's two types of covenants. The covenant that God made with Abraham was an unconditional covenant. That means that it was to go on, that God was going to keep it. A conditional covenant is based upon if certain things are kept in line, then that covenant goes on. If one of the two parties breaks that, then that covenant is null and void. But what God does, He does eternally. He does forever. And so He made covenant with Abraham that on one occasion, and I can't remember if it's the 12th, 13th or 15th chapter of the book of Genesis, but at one point he took Abraham out and he said, you look all around, down to the river in Egypt, up to the territory in Assyria, and all around. This I give unto you and to your seed. And to show how much that Abraham took that seriously, whenever that his wife died, Sarah, he went in and bought. It was the owner of the land was going to just give it to Abraham. And Abraham insisted on buying it so that it was his, that burial place. So he had a stake there. He had seed planted there, so to speak. So things like that I just kind of bring up because I think it kind of reinforces what we, for the most part, have seen taking place over in the Middle East. I will tell you, according to the scriptures, that's their land. That's their territory. Now we're going to look at Ruth and how that she is going to be taken in by Boaz. And starting with the first verse, it says that Naomi, her mother-in-law, that is Ruth's mother-in-law, said unto her, My daughter, shall I not seek rest for thee, that it may be well with thee? Now notice the relationship there. She called her her daughter. She didn't say her daughter-in-law or hey you or Ruth, but she referred to her as her daughter. And I think there was a bond that had happened there. There was a closeness that over the years had kind of melted their hearts together. And of course, Ruth was probably learning the ways of the Hebrews at this time, so Naomi was a big help in that. She probably taught her, you know, here's what we eat, here's what we don't eat, here's the celebrations that we have, here's what we do, here's what we don't do. Once a year we go up to the tabernacle, we offer a sacrifice for atonement, and so on and so forth. So at any rate, she said unto her that Boaz is not Boaz of our kindred. I'm getting my words kind of mixed around there. But is not Boaz of our kindred, second verse, and whose maidens thou wast, you worked for him. You even gleaned in the field as someone, not as one of the poor, but as a hired individual. So it said, Behold, he winnoweth barley tonight at the threshing floor. Now when they winnowed, did I pronounce that right? Winnowed. When they winnowed barley and wheat, what they would do is that they had a platform, they had a place where that they did all this, and there were oxen that were there that would tread out the grain or pull a sled over the top of it. And what it would do, it would separate the head of those grains from what we would call chaff. In fact, in the Old Testament, it says, Thou shalt not muzzle the ox that treadeth out the corn. Remember that verse of Scripture? We shall not muzzle the ox that would eat the grain. So, well, this ox would go through, and I don't know if he went around in a circle like mules used to do whenever that they would extract juice out of cane to make molasses, but nevertheless they would tread out and separate the grain heads from the rest of the chaff. Well, winnowing was whenever that they went in, and I don't know what the device looked like, but they would go in and they would catch the breeze as it was coming through, and they would take whatever it was and throw it up into the air. The chaff would be blown away, but the grain would fall to the ground. And that grain was what they were interested in. I don't know where the chaff went to. Probably down to the Dead Sea, for all I know. But at any rate, this was what winnowing was. This is what Boaz was doing at the end of the harvest. He was kind of supervising, or he was kind of working along with them. With him being down there, and this is kind of the genius, I guess you'd say, of Naomi. Matchmakers seem to have a knack for, that's nothing against matchmakers, but at any rate, they seem to have a knack for making circumstances work together, to bring people together. Now, I never was involved in it, or that I know of, but this was a very common thing that they would arrange marriages. So she said, Boaz is going to be down at where they're winnowing the wheat, and said, you get on, you wash yourself. I don't know if she's soaked in Calgon or what. And then you put on Chanel number 5 and a dress from Vogue magazine. You make yourself look presentable. She would go down there and she would wait until that Boaz had finished the process of harvesting the wheat. And when he went to sleep, whenever that he lay down, he slept in the place where the grain was at. Now, the reason why is kind of like what we mentioned before. In the book of Judges, that era of time before there was a king, it was very lawless. It was something else. And if somebody walked off and left their grain there, most likely in the morning it wouldn't be there. So he slept there and stayed there so that no one would steal the grain. Okay. She was to watch. This was all the instructions of Naomi. Naomi had this thing all figured out. With God's help, of course. But she was to watch whenever that Boaz went to rest or to sleep. And Boaz put a blanket, I guess you would say, around himself, around his body, and he lay down to sleep. Well, while he was sleeping, kind of in the midnight hour, she would walk up and she would lift up a corner of that blanket and lay down, and I don't know if she slept or what, but anyway, he would be up here, she would be down here. Now, you'll find commentators that will try to make something kind of immoral out of this. They compare it to our day and time. This was a ceremonial thing, actually. This was a ceremonial thing. It wasn't, for intimacy's purpose or anything like that. But it was a ceremonial thing. She would slip up the corner of the blanket, kind of lay down with that part of the blanket over. And it was saying, in essence, that she wanted to be under the wing of Boaz. Now, she, in the second chapter, I believe it was, made a vow that she was under the wing of God. You'll see that phrase ever so often, under his wing. There's even a song that talks about that, talks about being under his wing. And that's partially what this is referring to. Now, she followed these instructions because she didn't know her rights under these commandments out of Leviticus and Deuteronomy. She didn't know entirely all about it. So she'd have to remember what Naomi had told her, and that she had a right to present herself before Boaz so that he would perform, kind of in a way, that law where that he would take her as a wife, and in doing so, he would help to restore perhaps what had been lost by Mahlon and Elimelech. Well, you can imagine that Boaz woke up, probably wondered where the cover went to, that his feet were cold, and looked down and, oh my goodness, where did this woman come from? It's almost in a way kind of like Adam went into a deep sleep and he woke up married. Poor Jacob. That didn't happen to Jacob. He woke up and he was married, but it was to the wrong daughter. So at any rate, he saw her, and of course he knew her from the fields, where that she had been harvesting the grain, and she had been gleaning in the fields. So during this time, there had been some feasting going on. This was the Feast of First Fruits. Pentecost is the name of it. And that's what, whenever Pentecost is observed, what they're talking about. They're talking about something of this nature. It's a time of celebration of the reaping of the first fruit. So at any rate, she was seeking rest. And if you see that word rest, it's kind of understood in that culture, in that day and time, that she was seeking a home. She was seeking security. and she was seeking to have her in a position that Boaz would marry her, that Boaz would restore the property that had been lost with Elimelech and also with her husband Mahlon. So at any rate, this is what occurred, and this is what Naomi helped us kind of set up and kind of get established. Now, she gave, as we said, Ruth some very, very definite instructions on what to do in presenting herself to Boaz. And I want to reiterate that once again, that this was not a situation of intimacy in any way. It was a ceremonial thing. It was a ceremonial gesture, if you will. And at any rate, she pretty well had presented herself. I am Ruth, your maidservant. I am the one that's worked in your fields. And you know, he was going to redeem that. And here's the first time that redemption is talked about in this sense. Now, redemption was talked about and referred to down in Egypt whenever that God led the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. They were redeemed from the land of Egypt. But here is a picture, and it's ironic. It's a picture using the ancestry of the Lord Jesus Christ. It's almost like God is saying, I'm going to bring a Redeemer kinsman into the world to redeem all who will come unto him. But I'm going to use them as kind of like an example and kind of like an icon, if you will, of how that one that is not in the line of the children of Israel, Ruth, can be brought in. It's kind of a picture to us as how that God was going to bring the Gentiles into the commonwealth of Israel. Now, when I say into the commonwealth of Israel, it goes pretty deep there. Now, we always think of a Jew as being one who's circumcised. I'm not taking anything away from that. But Paul talks in one place about that we are spiritual Jews, though we're Gentiles, because we've received the circumcision of the heart. The circumcision of the heart is in the spirit and not in the letter of the law. In other words, the law could not save. The law could not redeem. The law could not make one a child of Israel. But we find that we are Jews in a sense. We're the chosen spiritually in the Gentile age. And that's not to say, and don't misunderstand, that's not to say that the Jews that are over there in Israel and here in this country, that they're still not chosen. I think that covenant is still in effect. I don't think that it was ever broken, because God was the one that made the covenant, and when he could swear by no greater, Hebrews says, he swore by himself, because he knew that he would have to be the one that would keep the part of that covenant on his part and on Abraham's part. So it was an everlasting. When you see the word everlasting, it means it doesn't end. And so at no point did God sever relationships with them and say, well, now I'm going to turn around and do something different over here. It's still part of a plan, the plan of God. Well, I know I've kind of gotten really off here, but at any rate, all this that was taking place with Ruth and Boaz, it was Ruth saying, you are, and I claim you, Boaz, as my Redeemer kinsman. Now, we want to get into that later, why that they're referred to as a Redeemer kinsman. But at this point, we just want to just kind of set the stage. Now, everything was going well, and it looked like it was wedding bells or the canopy, if you will, and the smashing of the glass for Ruth and Boaz, except except there was a kinsman that was even closer to Ruth than Boaz. In other words, he would have a rightful claim on it first, as to marrying Ruth, and also as to redeeming her portion of that wealth, or Elimelech's portion of that wealth. And it's interesting that she really had nothing more that she could do. She had done all that she could in presenting herself before Boaz. But it was up to Boaz to go to this other kinsman and find out if he was going to make claim that Ruth would be his wife, and this inheritance that he would reclaim. And it's kind of a picture of Christ's grace, which is Boaz, and this other kinsman over here, which is the law. And you know, the law could only go so far in the redemption of all men, of all mankind. It could only go so far. Had no power to save. Had no power to redeem. In fact, whenever that Boaz went to this next of kin and presented this, he said, I can't take her as wife. And I can't take my wealth and buy this, because I will, quote unquote, mar my inheritance. So,
because she was a Moabite?
Right. Right. And because really, in actuality, that would cut off, kind of in a backdoor sort of way, the inheritance his children would have. So that's what it means whenever it says it would mar his inheritance. So it was a picture of the law. The law could not save, but here comes Boaz, who's going to redeem Ruth. Now, I don't know if you see the parallel there, but at any rate, it's a clear picture, and he's a type of Christ. You know, he didn't care that she was a Gentile. That probably never crossed his mind. There was no evil intention with him. In fact, Boaz was a very upright individual. He had a lot of integrity, and he had a lot of forthrightness, and he was wanting to do that which was right. And so he kind of won, if you will, the opportunity and the right to become Ruth's husband. So Boaz kind of tells her in a way, said, I'll see what this other kinsman is going to do, but first, I'll go to him, and if he doesn't lay claim to it as a redeemer kinsman, then I will take you. Okay, at any rate, things look really up and look like they're going well. And so to show kindness unto Naomi, and get this was before Naomi became his mother-in-law. Man, I got in good with my mother-in-law. She likes strawberry milkshakes. And her dad liked fried chicken. And I tell you what, it worked. It worked. But at any rate, he was going to send something back to Naomi. And what he did, he loaded down, it was kind of like a shawl, with some of the barley grain. And the scripture says it was about 6 measures. Now, this is kind of speculative. I won't go into the, how much an ephod was, or, so on and so forth. But it turned out, if we got that calculator right, that he was going to give her about 60 pounds of grain, which with barley grain, that goes a long way. and he loaded it upon her. Now, I don't know how Ruth carried it. Do I?
How she carried it, that's why.
Yeah. If you've ever seen films or documentaries of people in that part of the country, the way that women carry things, that they would put it upon their head and carry it that way. Now, I don't know if she did that, but I would say for that day and time and noting how that the customs were, I would say she probably carried that home to Naomi, kind of balanced on her head. 60 pounds of grain. That's really something. So at any rate, Boaz, it looks like it's smooth sailing because they're going to get married, having gotten everything worked out with the other Redeemer kinsmen. So next week, we'll look at the 4th chapter where Boaz marries Ruth. This was probably something that under normal circumstances would have caused quite a scandal at the gates. You know, where that the judges or where that the elders sat. Because what in the world is Boaz thinking marrying a Moabite? Now, there wasn't anything really wrong with him marrying a Moabite. The problem came in is if they tried to bring that Moabite individual into the sanctuary in worship of God. Well, by this time, she had embraced the God of Israel. So that really she was born a Moabite, but now she's a Jewess. She's kind of met that qualification. So at any rate, we want to look at some questions here. Okay, and just kind of open up everything for discussion. Culturally, did Naomi have the right to be involved in Ruth's relationship with Boaz? And this is one of those open-ended type of questions. Anybody a thought on that? Or was she meddling?
I think she had the right. She's got a human kindness, if nothing else.
Exactly.
She regarded her as her daughter.
Yeah.
Right. Right. That goes right along with it, doesn't it? Yeah. And she referred to her as her daughter, didn't she?
Well, now Naomi was a mother-in-law to her, right?
Right.
So she'd been married before. Right?
Well, yeah.
He got killed or something.
Well, yeah, he died. Her husband was Mahlon, one of Elimelech's sons. And while they were down in Moab, Mahlon died and left Ruth a widow. Left Naomi a widow, and then the other, Orpah, I believe was her name, the other Moabite that had married one of Elimelech's sons, that son had died too. So they were 3 widows, basically. But instead of regarding her like a daughter-in-law, she left off with the legalities of her and just called her a daughter.
Yeah, there probably wasn't any word for daughter-in-law anyway. Right?
Well, that's quite possible.
Yeah.
That's quite possible because, yeah, Orpah left because
She didn't want to go with
she didn't want to go with Naomi, and Naomi said, you know, you can go back unto your people, unto your family, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so in discussion here, she did have kind of a right.
In the Old Testament, the parents set up the marriages.
Right. If you've ever watched Fiddler on the Roof, I don't know if it's like that, but there were arranged marriages. You know, sometimes they would do it from birth. So, Brother Ron, aren't you glad that your son
Yeah.
That'd be something else.
I think we see a change in Naomi at this point too. You know,
Right.
She came back with no hope and just feeling empty, and I think she has hope for Ruth now, and Ruth's future.
Yeah.
I hope in
And I think there was a kinship that was there. I think the distinction that she was a Moabite in Naomi's mind, I don't think that she thought of her as that way. And I think on their journey back, as they went back kind of the way they came in, as they went along, as they traveled, no doubt Naomi taught Ruth and instructed her and talked about the God of Israel, the only one and true God that there is. And I think that that was kind of, if you will, where Ruth was saved, you know, that she did embrace the God of Israel. Okay, any other discussion on that? Yeah.
I kind of think I can go either way on whether Naomi had the right to do this, but I think Ruth gave her the right.
Right. We're not really sure what Moabite custom was.
Exactly.
Yeah, or what their thought on it was. We're just kind of looking at it
Their
one-sided.
relationship was close enough that whatever Naomi believed and felt, Ruth was willing to follow it. So basically, I think Ruth,
Yeah,
granted Naomi the trust and the right
right,
to do that.
exactly.
In that sense, but I don't know if it came just as if this was two different people, another daughter-in-law and another mother-in-law, I don't know that right would have been there.
Yeah, yeah, under other circumstances.
Exactly, the relationship they had.
Yeah, and it was because of that, the kindness, the camaraderie, the love, between them kind of helped those circumstances, because they were both, widowed. They didn't know what lay in store for them in Bethlehem. Naomi wasn't even sure if they would be accepted back since they went over and lived so long in Moab. But I think, maybe from that they became real close and just really became bonded together, as we would say today. Any other discussion on that? Okay. For this, what did it require on Ruth's part? Any thoughts?
Ruth to trust Naomi
Right,
and obey.
right. Exactly. Exactly. She had to put her, she was going to be going into a country that she'd heard probably, Mahlon talking about, Elimelech talking about, we came out of Judah, we came out of Bethlehem, so she wasn't exactly sure what this was all going to entail. But you're right, the faith and obedience were keys there. Any other discussion? Anything else? Okay, why was it important for Ruth to follow Naomi's instructions? Oh, okay.
Well, normally I would say daughter-in-laws don't always mind their mother-in-laws.
Yeah.
But this was such an unusual case.
It really was. It really was. I don't know that you'd find in the scriptures anything even close to this or anything that would rival this at all. It was important in what other ways?
Learn Jewish ways.
Right, right. If she had been kind of thrown into the situation without understanding some of the customs, some of the religious teachings and so on and so forth, it would just, no telling what she would have done. But because she had Naomi there, and also giving her instructions, as she began to reveal to Naomi that I've met this man that owns this field that's been real kind to me. And Naomi finding out that, well, this is next of kin, maybe here's an opportunity that your property or your belongings or whatever might be redeemed, and that he might marry you. We're going to kind of back up a little bit. Number 3, what's Ruth's attitude in verse 5? I'll just read verse 5. And she said unto her, all that thou sayest unto me, I will do.
There's no way.
Yeah, sounds like she was agreeable to it, doesn't it?
She trusted Naomi and believed, and the obedience was there because she felt, that the care was there, the love was there.
Right.
That's
Yeah,
what she was showing.
yeah. She was willing to kind of, in a sense, put her life in Naomi's hands. Her future into Naomi's hands. Okay, we come to 7 through 13. And what was Ruth asking Boaz to do for her whenever that they met at the threshing floor? What was she asking Boaz to do for her? To be her redeemer kinsman? Right? Right. Right.
She was doing, and she was doing her part, he's, no.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. A symbol, a ceremony in a way of her desire to be taken under his wing, like you said. Any other discussion on that? Okay, going on down to number 6. What did this midnight meeting reveal about the character of Ruth and Boaz? We'll start with Ruth. What did it reveal about Ruth?
She wanted to do things the right way, like her mother-in-law Naomi had taught her.
Right, right. That there was no ulterior motive.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of like what it says in Proverbs 31 about a virtuous woman. Okay. And she was
She's loyal.
loyal, right?
It took a lot of faith and strength,
And courage.
courage.
That would be almost like if we were in the same set of circumstances as Ruth, and we were asked by whomever to go back to Soviet or go back to Russia with them. Swallow hard, because that would be take a lot of faith, wouldn't it? To do something like that, or to a country you have no idea.
Customs are.
Right, what the customs are, what they believe.
It must have seemed really strange to her to be told to go lay at his feet. She must have had a lot of questions
Yeah,
about doing that.
but yet she did it just right down to the minute detail, even as to how to respond to Boaz whenever that he said what he did. Okay, what kind of a person was Boaz then?
An honest man trying to follow the rules.
I would say a gentleman.
High morals.
High morals, right. Trying to do the right thing. High integrity. Yeah. Instead of taking advantage of the situation, he realized, it's interesting, he realized and understood what she was asking just in her actions. that she wanted to be under his wing, so to speak. If you ever watch documentaries about ceremonies that the Jews sometimes do in their synagogues and temples, they wear a talith. It's kind of like a shawl with prayer knots down at the bottom. And there's at one point, if they have their wife standing next to them, they embrace them and put that talith around them. And it's kind of a carry back, or kind of a reference back to something like this. That's showing under the wing of the husband. So Boaz realized, he understood what she was asking, and he was very virtuous himself, wasn't he?
Okay, so is Ruth and Boaz, do they love each other, or are they just going through
Kind of like an arranged marriage. Yeah, kind of. Yeah,
she just wanting someone to take care of her and make sure, she will be, respected, and
right.
is he taking her just because, she's pretty and
Right.
I could use someone like that?
I think probably it was a little of everything. I think there was a foundation of love that was there at some point.
They had to go through all the rules?
All the rules, yeah. They had to go, going to the other kinsman redeemer, who had the first say in the marriage and so on and so forth. That was something that, Boaz could have just thrown up his hands and said, okay, you go to him. But no, I think he was interested enough in Ruth and loved her enough, and I think he was wanting to do that right thing, which was to be a kinsman redeemer to her. And I have to think that he was trusting God for this. He may not have understood entirely that what was happening was to, I'm going to be in the lineage of the Messiah. I don't know that he knew that, but I do know that he had to kind of look at that in faith, believing not only it was the right thing to do, but I do believe that there had to be some sort of love that was there. She was a widow. She was a Moabite. She had basically nobody. It was just her and her mother-in-law.
See, earlier, you seen her out there in the field.
Right.
And he thought, she's not the regular
Right.
scrounger out there.
Yeah. There was probably something that stood out about her, and there's that part, I'll just say this. There was that part, he's a guy and she's a girl. So there had to be, but yet at the same time, he did it not only as a potential husband, he did it almost like a father, in a sense, because he wanted to not only make her his own, but he wanted to take her under his wing. And like I said, I don't know that he understood all that implied and all that was going to take place, but I do believe that he loved her.
And he was startled whenever he woke up and saw her there. And I think because of their age difference too.
Right.
I think we talked about that at the beginning.
Right.
How much older he was than she is at this point. And in verse 10 where it says, "Blessed be thou of the Lord, my daughter, for thou hast showed more kindness in the latter end than at the beginning, inasmuch as thou followed not young men, whether rich or to rich." That he was, I think he was startled that she showed the interest back to him.
Yeah.
At the beginning he gave her food, he brought her
Right.
up, let her, protected her then, but to
And
the forward that she had an interest in him.
And I think too, there were probably others that were there. She could have had her choice of any of them, but it was him. you know.
You brought that up, kinsman and all that. And I think probably God knew that the kinsman didn't want to redeem her, because wouldn't, and Boaz would.
Yeah, yeah, I do too. I think though, to really kind of seal the deal, so to speak, he wanted to make sure that all the T's were crossed and the I's dotted, so to speak, and so that somebody wouldn't come along later and say, "Hey, wait a minute," you know. Maybe years later, come along and say, "Hey, wait a minute, I'm closer kindred than she is." You just wanted to make sure that everything was proper. You wanted to have integrity about it, but at the same time, I think he loved her because he could have at that point just stopped and said, "Well, okay, Ruth, you need to go to him." But
Was the kinsman, they was like a relation, right?
right, yeah,
Was these guys related to Naomi, or? Because they wouldn't be related to her.
they
She'd been a Moabite.
right, they were probably Elimelech's kindred. You know, like
Naomi's husband.
No.
yeah, Naomi's husband Elimelech.
Yeah.
They were probably somehow connected to him in the family tree.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, in verse 13, if you'll look there for just a moment, verse 13. Do you see a marriage proposal in that? I'll read 13. Tarry this night, and it shall be in the morning that if he will perform unto thee, that's speaking about the other individual related to her. If he will perform unto thee the part of a kinsman, well, let him do the kinsman's part. But if he will not do the part of a kinsman to thee, then I will do the part of a kinsman to thee, as the Lord liveth, and lie down until the morning. In a sense, does that kind of sound like it's not your typical marriage proposal, perhaps.
You don't want her, I do.
It wouldn't matter who you were.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it. That's a good way of saying it.
Offers been made.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
We should have.
Okay. In 14 and 15 verses, those verses, how did he provide, how did he protect and provide for Ruth? What did he do?
Give her the barley.
Right? Gave her the barley, made sure that,
That's a protection.
right, made sure she was protected, made sure that the circumstances were such that if somebody was seeing all this, that they didn't get the wrong idea, and maybe her reputation be tarnished, because actually Ruth, and this was the amazing part, had a good reputation among the elders that sat in the gates of Bethlehem.
Well, it said, don't let it be known that a woman came to the threshing floor.
Well,
So he did not want it to be known.
Right.
So that would be a,
apparently women didn't come to the threshing floor or something.
Yeah, yeah, it wasn't a common thing. Yeah, yeah.
And we talked about why she stayed the night. You said that it was to protect her from,
Well, if she'd gone back, after everything had taken place, and once again, it's in the period of the judges, there was quite a bit of lawlessness or potential lawlessness without a king, so on and so forth. There was a possibility there that she might have been mugged or, worse. So I think he was watching out for her, in a sense. Okay. Any other discussion on that? Okay. How was Naomi waiting on God? What was she waiting for?
The answer.
Right. Right.
Anxiously interested.
Yeah.
Exactly. She
didn't have
would.
a cell phone back then, did they?
Yeah. Well, she was waiting to see what had happened, and maybe to, if Boaz didn't, go give the boy a talking to.
Right.
Probably praying that the other one would say no.
Right.
That's right.
But I think you're right. She was waiting on the Lord, and she had done all that she could do, and Ruth had done all that she could do.
She had the plan, and
Right.
now she has to wait on God's will
Right.
to play it in.
And that's exactly what God wanted. Because, like I said, if you look in the book of Matthew and the book of Luke about the lineages, so-and-so begat so-and-so begat so-and-so begat so-and-so. If you look at those, you see that kind of like unbroken line that includes Boaz and Boaz's offspring, Obed, and Obed's offspring, Jesse, and Jesse's offspring, David.
And then through David is the lineage of
The lineage of Christ. An interesting thing, if you look, it's kind of hard, you almost need a chart. But both Mary and Joseph were in that line. Both of them were. Yeah. I have to dig it out. Huh? I think so. Yeah, I'm probably looking right at it. But at any rate, both Mary and Joseph were of the lineage of David. Isn't it amazing how God worked? Well, I guess we shouldn't say amazing, but isn't that something how God works things like that out? And if you follow that all the way, the son of Abraham, Abraham was in the lineage too. Okay, why did Naomi tell Ruth to sit? I started to say sit still. Yeah. Why did Naomi tell Ruth to sit still? Or be still? Maybe that's what it was. Was it sit still? Okay.
That's what she says.
It's
Verse
still
18
here.
says, "Sit still,
Okay.
To have patience and trust.
still my daughter."
Right. Right.
What she is having her do,
Yeah.
in God, just to have that patience and trust in His will be done.
Exactly. And that was another important lesson that I think that Ruth had to learn and needed to learn, because sometimes human nature look for an immediate answer. She was probably over at the window looking to see if Boaz was coming. And Naomi just had to calm her down. Just, Ruth, you're driving me crazy. Will you sit down and be still? But, and you kind of extrapolate human nature into that. There's some scripture. There's like 3 scriptures. One is be still, one is stand still, and what's the other one? I can't think of it right now. Be still, stand still. I'll think of it on the way home. Okay. Any other questions on these?
I think she had to just wait on God at that point.
Right.
The Hebrew translation say that it means hands off and relax.
Right. Like you've done all that you can do.
And all you can do.
Just wait on God and let Him take care of the circumstance.
Still,
Because this was God's to begin with. And interesting, that's where that we find she was the great grandmother of David. And it said of David, he was a man after God's own heart. All right. Anything before that we would change service tonight?
I think an interesting thing about it, that, we all, I think, would agree that God was in everything that was going on here with Ruth and Naomi and Boaz. But I think, unfortunately, sometimes we got to look. He was also in Naomi's husband dying, Ruth's husband getting killed, which was tragic. I'm sure at the time and everything. And these bad events had to happen for for God's plan to come about.
Yeah.
And it should be reassuring to us that God is in control. But again, you got to think some tragedies was in here, and they was almost to the point of, starvation or something.
Right.
And
Right.
Devastating.
he didn't just come in, after Ruth and Naomi, came into Boaz's area.
Yeah. Yeah. It would be hard seeing that happening and trying to see God in all of it. And there's where sometimes just faith comes in, that God does have it under control. Anyone else? All right. Next time we meet, we'll be looking at the fourth chapter and fourth chapter of the book of Ruth. And I think it's kind of interesting that at the very end of the chapter, very end of the book, they go down from the line of Judah, Phares, on down to David. They kind of course and they kind of map out the lineage of the house of Judah, so to speak.